Just hours before I walked down the aisle in Massachusetts, my mother handed me a bill for $45,000. She smiled and called it an inconvenience fee for attending my wedding, right after secretly canceling my band and cake. She whispered that if I didn't pay, she and my sister would completely humiliate me in front of everyone. They thought I was trapped. What they didn't know was I had anticipated their toxic sabotage. I didn't cry or transfer a single dime. Instead, I smiled, signaled the DJ, and revealed my own ultimate receipt. The massive LED screen lit up with hidden camera footage of them, plotting the entire betrayal. Before I tell you how they fled in absolute shame, welcome back to my channel. Drop your age and your city in the comments, and please like and subscribe if you believe some bridges are better left burned. It was 11:14 in the morning. The bridal suite at the Gloucester estate smelled of hairspray and the salt breeze coming off the harbor. I sat in a velvet chair, watching the second hand of the wall clock sweep past the 12. My mother, Joanne, stood beside the vanity. She did not raise her voice. She simply unclasped her leather tote and slid a standard manila folder across the marble surface. The paper inside was thick, printed on formal letterhead. She told me it was an invoice. Her tone mirrored a bank teller explaining a routine overdraft. I picked up the document. The top line read childhood expenses and career forfeiture. Below it, an itemized list detailed orthodontic work from 1998, a cheerleading camp from my sophomore year of high school, and a calculated percentage of the income she believed she would have earned had she not stayed home to raise me. The total at the bottom was precise. It read $45,210. My stomach turned, not from the shock of the demand, but from the sickening realization of my own failure. 4 months ago, I made a fatal compromise. As a municipal compliance auditor, my daily life revolves around risk assessment, identifying vulnerabilities, and enforcing tight protocols. Yet, when it came to my own family, I ignored my professional instincts. Joanne had spent the better part of a year leaving voicemails about feeling excluded from the wedding planning, constantly reminding me that moving 2 hours away to Boston was a personal rejection of her and my sister Chloe. Exhausted by the daily friction, I granted her proxy access to the master vendor portal. I convinced myself it would pacify her. My fiancé Liam had warned me. He is a physical therapist, a pragmatic man who measures everything in structural stability and recovery timelines. He sat at our kitchen island, looked at the shared login screen on my laptop, and told me I was handing her a loaded weapon. I told him he was being cynical. I told him it was just a way to keep the peace. He was right, and I was wrong. Joanne poured herself a glass of sparkling water. She told me I was marrying a man with a steady practice. She said I was stepping into a very comfortable life, and it was only fair that I settle my outstanding debts before starting a new household. She explained that Chloe was struggling financially, that she was struggling, and that it was time to balance the ledger. I looked at my phone sitting next to the folder. I told her I was not paying her a salary for raising me. Joanne took a sip of her water. She said she figured I might resist, which was why she logged into the portal that morning. She informed me that the florist had been dismissed, the string quartet was gone, and the bakery would not be delivering the cake. A cold knot tightened in my chest. I opened the vendor application on my phone. Red cancellation banners covered the dashboard. She had authorized the withdrawals and severed the contracts using the administrative privileges I gave her. She set her glass down. She gave me a deadline. If the wire transfer was not initiated by 3 o'clock, she and Chloe would take the microphone during the ceremony. They would tell Liam's family how I treat my own blood. They would let everyone in the room know I was bankrupting my mother. I stared at the woman who taught me how to tie my shoes. She was calmly holding my reputation hostage. I tapped the screen, navigating to the administrative settings, desperate to revoke her permissions before she touched anything else. Before the page could load, 3 sharp knocks echoed from the suite door. The venue coordinator stepped inside, holding a clipboard against her chest. Her face was pale. She looked nervously between me and my mother, then announced that she had just received an automated alert from the portal. The catering vendor had just confirmed a full cancellation. Joanne adjusted her watch, looking out the window at the ocean. The trap had closed. At 11:45 in the morning, the walk down the long carpeted corridor toward the groom's suite felt like a march to a grim deposition. I knocked twice on the heavy oak door. One of the groomsmen opened it, holding a pair of silver cufflinks with a joke resting on his lips. He took one look at my face, swallowed the joke, and quickly ushered the rest of the wedding party into the hall, pulling the door shut behind them. Liam was standing by the tall bay window, adjusting a half-tied Windsor, not in the reflection of the glass. He turned around expecting a mundane question about seating arrangements or the arrival of his grandparents. Instead, he saw my expression. He dropped his hands slowly to his sides. I did the hardest thing I have ever had to do in our 5 years together. I stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by half-empty water bottles, discarded garment bags, and the faint scent of shaving cream, and I confessed. I laid out the invoice, the canceled vendors, and the staggering $45,000 demand. But the core of the confession was not about Joanne and her cruelty. It was about me and my weakness. I told him I had given her the administrative login credentials 4 months ago directly against his specific repeated advice, because I lacked the spine to endure her daily guilt trips. Liam did not yell. He did not throw anything. He simply looked at me for a long, heavy moment. Then he slowly reached for his left wrist. He unclasped the silver chronograph, watch I had given him as a wedding gift just hours before. The metallic click echoed loudly in the quiet room. He placed the watch carefully back into its velvet box, closing the lid with a soft snap. He looked at the closed box and then back at me. His eyes were flinty, and his voice was terrifyingly calm. He said a marriage is a load-bearing structure, Ava, and I cannot build a secure house with a partner who hands a sledgehammer to the person actively trying to demolish it. The silence that followed was worse than any screaming match. The wedding was effectively paused. I sat on the edge of the unmade bed, feeling the intricate beadwork of my dress dig into my skin. I had no defense. I offered no excuses. I just watched him standing there, a physical distance between us that felt miles wide. Finally, he rubbed his temples, closed his eyes, and let out a heavy breath. He picked up the velvet box, took the watch out, and strapped it back onto his wrist, tightening the leather firmly. He said we would deal with our fractured trust later, because right now we had an active threat downstairs, and we needed a barricade. I stood up and walked over to the full-length mirror in the corner of the suite. The woman staring back at me looked small, terrified, and defeated. I watched a single tear roll down and ruin the edge of my carefully applied makeup. It was pathetic. I thought about my office. I thought about the multi-million-dollar municipal budgets I audit, the corrupt contractors I expose, and the ruthless precision I use to dismantle fraud every single day. I clamped my teeth down hard on my lower lip, pressing until I tasted the sharp metallic tang of copper. The sudden physical pain grounded me. The tears stopped instantly. The panic evaporated, replaced by the cold, familiar clarity of my profession. As an auditor, I do not rely on emotion. I trace financial discrepancies, I find the leak, and I build an airtight case. We left the suite and walked directly to the venue management office on the first floor. The coordinator was sitting at her desk, holding her head in her hands, trying to reach the catering company on her desk phone. I asked her to turn her monitor toward me. I needed to see the archived communication logs from the master portal. Every time a user logs in the system, generates a timestamp, an IP address, and a digital footprint. If they send a message to a vendor through the internal server, a copy is retained permanently in the administrative backend. I navigated the interface, bypassing the active dashboard and digging deep into the archived threads. Joanne had not just clicked a button to cancel the contracts. She had sent messages. She had negotiated. Reading her digital correspondence, I did not find the cartoonish malice of a movie villain. I found something far more dangerous. I found the terrifying, suffocating logic of a desperate woman trying to save her favorite child. 3 weeks prior to the wedding, Joanne had initiated a desperate chat thread with the venue finance department. She begged them to cancel the catering and issue a refund check directly to her name. The venue management flatly refused, citing the locked 30-day non-refundable window. In her frantic attempt to prove financial hardship, Joanne uploaded a scanned document. It was a legal debt consolidation notice, addressed to Chloe showing a defaulted balance of $38,000. Next to it was a warning of a lien placed against Joanne's own residential property because she had co-signed Chloe's reckless debt. But Joanne is not a tech-savvy woman. When she dragged and dropped that PDF document into the vendor portal attachment box, she accidentally grabbed a second file sitting right next to it on her computer desktop. It was an MP4 video file. I clicked the video, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in Liam's eyes. It was a recorded Skype call between Joanne and Chloe, dated just a few days after the venue denied the refund. Chloe had drowned herself in consumer debt, and Joanne was terrified of losing her own home. The pieces snapped into a grim, logical grid. Since Joanne could not steal the catering deposit back from the venue, she decided to create a hostage situation. She looked at my impending marriage to a stable professional and saw a life raft. She had convinced herself that her sacrifice raising me functioned as a literal line of credit. Joanne felt cornered by the bank, so she decided to corner me. I printed the debt notice. I folded the warm paper and slid it into the hidden pocket of my dress. The paper felt heavy, a tangible receipt of their shared financial ruin. Just as the laser printer whirred to a stop, the venue manager hung up her desk phone. The color had not returned to her face. She looked at Liam, then at me, her hands folded tightly on her green blotter. She informed us that the situation was no longer just about missing appetizers, hungry guests, and a quiet reception. The historic estate we rented operated under a strict county hospitality license. The contract mandated that any event serving alcohol to over 50 guests must retain a licensed insured catering staff on site to manage consumption, provide food, and mitigate liability. Without the caterers present, the reception violated the site's core insurance policy. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. It was 12:45. Guests would begin arriving for the pre-ceremony cocktail hour at 3:00 sharp. The manager stated her position, clearly, her voice trembling slightly. If we could not secure a replacement vendor or find a legal loophole within the next 2 hours, she was legally obligated by the county to padlock the ballroom doors. The municipality would shut the entire event down before I even put on my veil, and we would forfeit the entire venue fee. We were standing on the edge of a logistical cliff, pushed there by my mother's desperation, and the clock was actively counting down. Liam looked at me, waiting to see if I would crumble under the weight of my own mistake, or if I would fight back. I reached across the desk and pulled the massive leather-bound venue contract toward me. I flipped to the liability clauses, scanning the dense paragraphs. I told the manager to get me a yellow highlighter and a cup of black coffee. At 2:15 in the afternoon, I slammed the heavy leather-bound binder shut and slid it across the mahogany desk. I had found the single loophole we needed. A buried clause allowed us to bypass the strict county food service laws by legally reclassifying our wedding as a dry, uncatered rental. The coordinator confirmed the loophole was valid, but warned us about the grim physical reality of that choice. Because Joanne had successfully canceled the independent florist and the luxury linen rental company, that morning the room was already bare. Executing this legal amendment meant locking down the kitchen, completely draining the bar, and turning off the ambient music. The grand reception hall would become a sterile echoing room, illuminated only by harsh overhead fluorescent lights. It was a deeply humiliating prospect. 120 guests were arriving expecting a formal celebration. Instead, they would walk into a barren space that resembled a town hall meeting after a budget cut. Liam stood next to my chair, his hand resting firmly on my shoulder. He did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He told the coordinator to file the amendment immediately. We chose the humiliation. It was the necessary cost of our survival. We refused to let my mother cancel the marriage, even if she successfully destroyed the party. We signed the updated addendum in black ink at exactly 2:30. We saved the legal ceremony, but the celebratory reception was effectively dead. As we walked out of the management office, Liam headed toward the sanctuary. He needed to brief his groomsmen on the austere reality awaiting our guests. I turned in the opposite direction, walking toward the main ballroom to locate the single vendor my mother had failed to eliminate from the roster. His name was Marcus. He was a veteran audiovisual technician, hired independently to manage the complex projector system. Joanne could not touch his contract because his contract did not exist on the shared digital portal. 4 months prior, I had met him at a local coffee shop and handed him a sealed envelope containing physical currency. He was brought in for one specific job. Liam wanted to play a short digitized 8mm film honoring his late grandfather during the evening speeches. Because the transaction happened off the grid using paper money, Marcus remained immune to the administrative wipeout Joanne had executed that morning. I found him near the elevated stage, uncoiling a thick black power cable. The room around him was actively being dismantled. Silent waitstaff were rolling away the large circular tables and stacking the padded gold chairs against the far wall. Marcus looked confused by the sudden organized exodus of caterers and florists, but he did not ask unnecessary questions. He was a seasoned professional, used to the erratic nature of live events. He simply continued taping down the wiring for the massive 12-foot LED display screen positioned directly behind the main head table. I stopped at the edge of the wooden stage. I opened my small silk bridle clutch, bypassing my lipstick and my breath mints. My fingers found the cold, smooth metal of a silver USB drive. I had exported the digital footprint of my mother's financial desperation, the recorded proof of her extortion, onto this small device while sitting in the coordinator office. I handed the small drive to Marcus. I instructed him to ignore the memorial video file we had discussed earlier in the year. I told him to load the single unlabeled video file contained on this new drive and cue it up for the exact moment my mother took the microphone for her traditional evening toast. He looked at the silver drive, then looked up at my face, noting the serious set of my jaw. He gave a single curt nod, slid the device into his front pocket, and turned his attention back to his illuminated soundboard. The snare was officially set. I left the cavernous ballroom and walked back toward the bridal wing to prepare for the impending procession. The long hallway was lined with tall arched windows, casting sharp afternoon shadows across the polished floorboards. At 2:45, I turned the final corner and found Joanne waiting for me. She stood near the heavy oak doors of the main sanctuary. The low, distant hum of guests, finding their designated seats, drifted through the thick wood. She did not look triumphant or victorious. She looked physically exhausted. The dialogue that followed was not a shouting match filled with dramatic insults. It was quiet, chilling, and hollow. Joanne stepped forward, closing the distance between us. She reached out to adjust the delicate lace edge of my veil. Her fingers were trembling slightly against my shoulder. I could smell her familiar floral perfume, mixed heavily with the sour scent of nervous sweat. She looked deep into my eyes, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She said, "I gave up my 20s for you, Ava." She told me Chloe was drowning. She stated that I had so much, and I was being selfish. She begged me to just wire the money, promising she would fix everything once the funds cleared her account. A single tear rolled down her powdered cheek, tracking through her foundation. That was the most terrifying part of the entire hallway encounter. She was not acting for an audience. She honestly believed she was the victim of my cruelty. In her distorted mind, her extortion was a noble act of maternal sacrifice. She had rewritten the reality of the situation to justify robbing her youngest daughter. She needed the narrative to make sense, so she made me the villain. I looked at the woman who had spent decades shaping my understanding of the world. A crushing, suffocating weight of grief settled deep inside my chest, pressing hard against my ribs. I realized with stark clarity that my next action would not just stop her immediate financial scheme. It would burn the bridge to my childhood to the ground. It would permanently sever my connection to my bloodline. The upcoming fracture would be public, irreversible, and unfixable. I swallowed the heavy lump forming in my throat. I kept my breathing slow and measured. I did not blink. I told her the wire transfer was currently pending in the banking application and would clear the system by the time the reception began. A wave of visible relief washed over her strained face. She smiled a tight, genuine smile, patted my cheek with her trembling hand, and walked through the oak doors into the sanctuary to take her honored seat in the front row. I stood alone in the quiet hallway, listening to the hired string quartet playing their final prelude. I gathered the heavy silk fabric of my dress, stepped forward into the light, and began my walk down the aisle. At 6:30 in the evening, the grand ballroom of the Gloucester estate felt like an abandoned municipal building. The heavy wooden doors had opened to reveal a stark and barren reality. 120 guests walked into a space stripped of its intended warmth. The floral centerpieces were gone. The white linen tablecloths had been stripped away, leaving bare scarred wood. The ambient uplighting had been deactivated, forcing the venue staff to rely on the harsh overhead fluorescent bulbs. Without the heavy fabrics and the hum of a catering staff, the acoustics in the room were brutal. Every shifted chair, every cleared throat, and every hushed whisper echoed off the high plaster ceilings. The guests sat at their designated tables, wearing formal gowns and tailored suits, staring at empty plates. Liam sat next to me at the head table. He did not look angry. He looked stoic, his jaw set in a hard line, his hand resting firmly over mine. My extended family occupied 3 tables near the front. They were whispering among themselves, casting confused glances at the empty corners, where the 10-piece band was supposed to be setting up. Joanne sat 2 chairs down from me. She looked remarkably relaxed. She had spent the last hour assuming the wire transfer was slowly processing through the banking architecture. She believed her manufactured crisis had been successfully averted, and she was ready to step back into the role of the loving maternal figure. She smoothed the skirt of her navy dress, picked up the wireless microphone resting on the bare table, and stood up. She tapped the metallic grill of the microphone twice. The sharp, percussive sound bounced off the barren walls, commanding the attention of the confused room. The scattered conversations died out, replaced by an uncomfortable, expectant silence. Joanne smiled a practiced, gentle expression. She began her mother of the bride toast. She spoke about watching me grow up, about the sacrifices parents make for their children, and about the deep, unbreakable bonds of family. She told Liam she was proud to welcome him into our lives. She was playing to the audience, projecting the image of a selfless matriarch who had given everything to see her daughter happy. I looked across the cavernous room and found Marcus standing in the shadows near the elevated stage. His hand hovered over the illuminated soundboard. I gave him a single concise nod. Marcus pressed a button. The 12-foot LED screen, positioned directly behind Joanne, flared to life. It cast a harsh blue glow over the back of her head and shoulders. The screen did not display a nostalgic slideshow of Liam and his late grandfather. It displayed the MP4 file Joanne had accidentally uploaded to the portal. It was the recorded Skype call between her and my sister. The video quality was crisp, showing Joanne sitting in her kitchen, holding a ceramic mug, looking at Chloe on the split screen. The audio track fed directly into the venue speaker system, overriding Joanne and her wireless microphone instantly. The digital version of Chloe was crying. Her voice echoed through the silent ballroom, panicked and breathless. She asked Joanne how they were going to pay the $38,000 before the bank seized the house. Joanne stopped speaking. She froze, turning her head slowly to look over her shoulder at the massive screen. The digital version of my mother leaned into the web camera. Her recorded voice filled the room, clinical and cold. She told Chloe to stop crying because she had a foolproof plan. She stated that the venue refused to refund the deposit, so they were going to do this the hard way. She outlined her strategy to use her administrative access to cancel the caterer, the florist, and the band on the morning of the ceremony. She said that I was desperate for a perfect day and would immediately pay the $45,000 invoice to avoid a public disaster. The digital version of Chloe wiped her eyes and asked what would happen if I called their bluff and refused to pay. The digital version of Joanne took a sip from her ceramic mug. She waved her hand dismissively and delivered the final sentence. She said Ava will pay without making a sound because she is terrified of conflict. She is the family cash cow, and it is time we milked her. The video feed abruptly cut to black. The blue light vanished, leaving the room bathed only in the harsh fluorescent glare. There were no exaggerated gasps from the audience. There was no screaming. There was only a sickening, suffocating silence. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy enough to crush bone. The guests sat paralyzed, staring at the blank screen, and then at Joanne. The loving matriarch facade had shattered, leaving only the raw, documented reality of her extortion. Joanne opened her mouth, but her vocal cords failed. Her hand trembled violently. Her fingers lost their grip on the smooth metal handle of the microphone. It slipped from her hand and hit the bare wooden table with a loud crack. The impact sent a piercing, high-pitched shriek of audio feedback through the speakers, forcing several guests in the front row to cover their ears. Chloe buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as the reality of her exposure set in. She pushed her chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the floorboards. She grabbed her purse from the table and walked rapidly toward the rear exit, keeping her head down, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Joanne stood at the head table for 3 more seconds. She looked at me. I did not break eye contact. I did not offer a lifeline. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, watching the consequences of her actions finally catch up to her. She turned away, gathered her tailored coat, and followed Chloe down the long center aisle. The heavy oak doors at the back of the hall opened and closed with a dull thud, swallowing them into the cold Massachusetts night. They fled in absolute shame, leaving behind a room full of witnesses who now understood the exact price of their presence. The victory was hollow. We did not cheer. There was no triumphant music playing to signal the end of the conflict. The reality of what I had just done settled over the room like a heavy winter frost. I had successfully defended my new husband, my bank account, and my autonomy. I had cut the toxic roots out of my life permanently. But the cost was immense. Aunt Patricia, my mother's oldest sister, stood up from her table. Her face was tight, pale with disapproval. In many American families, exposing a dark secret is often treated as a worse offense than the secret itself. She did not speak to me. She simply collected her wrap, signaled to her husband, and walked out of the venue. Over the next 10 minutes, 2 more tables of extended family members quietly excused themselves, unable to stomach the brutal public airing of our internal trauma. They chose the comfort of the illusion over the harshness of the truth. I watched them leave, accepting the losses as they came. Liam squeezed my hand, his thumb tracing the metal of my new wedding band. He leaned in and told me he was proud of me. That was the only validation I needed. The venue coordinator eventually pushed a small rolling cart into the room, placing a single bowl of stale pretzels and 2 bottles of sparkling water on our bare table. I sat under the buzzing fluorescent lights, wearing a ruined silk dress, eating dry pretzels in a silent, echoing room. I had won the war, but I was now an orphan by choice, fundamentally isolated from my bloodline. The ledger was finally balanced, and the cost of peace was everything.